The stagecoach rattled into Santa Fe, New Mexico on a scorching afternoon in July of 1878, and Rebecca Rose knew the moment her boots touched the dusty earth that her life would never be the same. She had traveled 3 weeks from Boston with nothing but a worn carpetbag, her mother's wedding ring sewn into the hem of her dress, and a heart full of determination to escape a marriage arranged by her father to a cruel banker twice her age. At 22 years old, she had finally chosen herself over duty, but the terror of that choice made her hands shake as she stood in the plaza, watching strangers move about their business under the relentless sun. The town square buzzed with life despite the heat. Adobe buildings lined the dusty streets, their earth-colored walls reflecting the harsh afternoon light. Merchants hawked their wares from wooden storefronts while horses stood tied to hitching posts, swishing their tails against persistent flies. Rebecca pulled her bonnet lower, trying to shield her pale skin from the unforgiving sun. Boston had never prepared her for this dry, endless heat that seemed to pull moisture from her very bones. She needed work immediately. The money she had stolen from her own dowry fund would last perhaps 2 weeks if she was careful. Her father would be furious by now, would have discovered her absence and the missing funds. The thought made her stomach twist with fear and guilt, but she pushed it away. She had made her choice. The hotel seemed the logical first stop. A weathered sign proclaimed it the Territorial Inn, and Rebecca smoothed her travel-stained skirts before pushing through the door. Inside, the dimness provided blessed relief from the glare. A heavy-set woman with graying hair stood behind a counter, eyeing Rebecca with open curiosity. "Help you, miss? I am looking for lodging," Rebecca said, trying to keep her voice steady. "And perhaps you might know if anyone in town is hiring." The woman's expression softened slightly. "You are a long way from home by the sound of it. Got references?" Rebecca's heart sank. "I have money to pay for a room. As for work, I am educated and I can read, write, and cipher. I can also sew and cook. Can you handle a bar?" The question came from behind her, and Rebecca turned to find herself looking up at the tallest man she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that seemed to fill the doorway. His face was weathered and tan, with a strong jaw darkened by stubble. But it was his eyes that caught her breath, pale blue like a winter sky, studying her with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "I have never worked in a saloon," she admitted, lifting her chin despite her nervousness. "Did not ask if you had. Asked if you could." His voice was deep and carried the slow drawl of someone who had spent their whole life under western skies. He wore dusty chaps over worn denim, a faded blue shirt, and a hat that had seen better days. A gun belt hung low on his hips, the holster tied down in the manner of someone who knew how to use it. "I suppose I could learn," Rebecca said carefully. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Name is Preston Pike. I run the Silver Spur 2 streets over. Lost my bartender last week to gold fever. Got a small room above the saloon that comes with the job. 3 meals a day, $20 a month." It was more than she had dared hope for. "That is very generous." "Is not charity," Preston said flatly. "You will earn every penny." "My customers can get rough, especially on Saturday nights when the ranch hands come to town. You keep the bar clean, pour drinks without spilling, and do not steal from the till. You handle drunks with a firm hand, and you call for me if anyone gets too friendly. Understood?" Rebecca nodded, though her stomach churned at the thought. Ladies in Boston did not work in saloons. Her mother would have fainted at the very idea. But her mother was 3 years dead, and her father had proven he cared more about business connections than his daughter's happiness. "When can you start?" "Right now, if you need me to." Preston studied her for another long moment, and Rebecca had the strange sensation he could see right through her careful composure to the frightened girl beneath. But all he said was, "Get your bag. I will show you to your room." The silver spur was larger than she expected, with a long polished bar, gaming tables scattered across the floor, and a small stage in the back corner. The room above the saloon was tiny but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. Preston stood in the doorway as Rebecca set down her carpetbag. "You running from something?" he asked bluntly. She turned to face him, her heart hammering. "What makes you think that? Lady like you does not travel alone to New Mexico without a powerful reason. Got that look about you." Scared but determined. He crossed his arms, the movement drawing her attention to the sheer size of him. "Do not care what you are running from so long as it does not bring trouble to my door." "It will not," Rebecca said firmly. "I give you my word. Good enough for now. Come down in an hour. I will show you how things work." That first evening passed in a blur of activity. Preston proved to be a patient teacher, showing her where everything was kept, how to pour whiskey without wasting a drop, and how much to charge for different drinks. The customers began filtering in as the sun set, cowboys and merchants and miners, all looking to wash away the day's dust with liquor and conversation. Rebecca's hands trembled the first time she served a drink, certain she would drop the glass or say something foolish. But the customer, a grizzled old prospector, just thanked her kindly and left a nickel on the bar. By the end of the night, her feet ached and her arms were tired from hauling bottles, but she felt a strange sense of pride in what she had accomplished. Preston locked the door after the last customer stumbled out into the night. Rebecca had been wiping down the bar, and she paused to watch him move through the room, checking windows and blowing out lamps. There was something reassuring about his steady presence, the way he moved with confidence and purpose. "You did well," he said, not looking at her. "Better than I expected for a first night." The praise warmed her more than it should have. "Thank you for this opportunity. Thank me by showing up on time tomorrow." But his tone was gentler than his words. Over the following weeks, Rebecca settled into a rhythm. She rose early, helped Preston prepare the saloon for the day, and worked until late in the evening. The work was hard and her hands grew rough, but she found she did not mind. For the first time in her life, she was earning her own way, beholden to no one. The fear that her father might somehow find her began to fade, replaced by a cautious hope. Preston remained an enigma. He spoke little about himself, but Rebecca learned through careful observation. He was unfailingly fair with his customers, breaking up fights with calm authority. He never raised his voice, but men twice his age obeyed him without question. He had a scar on his left hand that she suspected came from a knife fight, and sometimes late at night, when he thought she was not looking, she caught him staring out the window with an expression of deep sadness. She found herself watching him more than she should. The way his hands moved when he built a fire in the stove, the sound of his voice when he spoke to the piano player who came in 3 nights a week, the rare smile that transformed his stern face into something almost boyish. It was foolish and dangerous, these feelings growing in her chest. She had not escaped one trap only to fall into another, but her heart refused to listen to reason. One evening in late August, a group of drovers came through town, fresh from a cattle drive and eager to spend their pay. They were loud and boisterous, but mostly good-natured. Rebecca was serving drinks when one of them, younger than the rest with a cocky grin, caught her wrist as she set down his whiskey. "How about you take a break and sit with me, pretty lady?" Rebecca tried to pull away politely. "I am working, sir. Please let go." His grip tightened. "Just being friendly. No need to be cold." Before she could call for Preston, he was there, his hand closing over the drover's wrist with enough force to make the younger man yelp. "Lady asked you to let go," Preston said quietly. The saloon had gone silent, all eyes on them. The drover released Rebecca immediately, rubbing his wrist. "Did not mean any harm. Then there is no harm done." Preston's voice remained calm, but Rebecca saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his other hand rested near his gun. "You boys finish your drinks peacefully, and everyone goes home happy." The moment passed, conversation resuming as the drovers settled back down. But Rebecca felt shaken, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was in this rough town. Preston walked her to the bar, his hand gentle on her elbow. "You all right?" she nodded, not trusting her voice. His hand remained on her arm, warm through the thin fabric of her sleeve. When she looked up at him, something flickered in his eyes, there and gone so fast she almost missed it. "You handled that well," he said finally, dropping his hand. "But next time holler for me sooner. I did not want to cause trouble. Rebecca." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice made her shiver. "Keeping you safe is not trouble. It is my job." She wanted to tell him it felt like more than just a job, that she saw the way he watched her when he thought she was not looking, that sometimes their hands brushed when they were working side by side, and the touch lingered longer than necessary. But she held her tongue, nodding instead. September brought cooler weather and a new confidence to Rebecca's work. She had made a few friends among the townspeople, respectable women who stopped by during the day when the saloon was quiet. They taught her which merchants were fair and which would cheat her, how to bargain for goods at the market, how to navigate Santa Fe's complex social networks. She was no longer the frightened girl who had stepped off the stagecoach. She was becoming someone new, someone stronger. But the more confident she grew, the more aware she became of Preston. They worked in close quarters, and she learned the small details of his life. He owned the saloon outright, having saved for years to buy it. He had been a ranch hand before that, had driven cattle from Texas to Kansas more times than he could count. His parents were dead, buried somewhere in Missouri. He had a sister in California he had not seen in 5 years. He was 30 years old and had never been married. That last detail should not have mattered, but it did. One quiet afternoon in October, a well-dressed man entered the saloon. Rebecca was sweeping the floor while Preston worked on repairing a broken chair. The stranger looked out of place, with his expensive suit and polished shoes. "I am looking for a Miss Rebecca Rose," he said, his Boston accent unmistakable. Rebecca's blood turned to ice. The broom clattered from her nerveless fingers. Preston was on his feet instantly, positioning himself between her and the stranger. "Who is asking?" His hand rested on his gun belt, casual but ready. "My name is Charles Whitmore. I am an attorney representing Mr. Henry Rose of Boston. I have been retained to locate his daughter and return her home." "No," the word burst from Rebecca's lips. "I will not go back." Mr. Whitmore's expression remained professionally neutral. "Miss Rose, your father is quite concerned. He has authorized me to use whatever means necessary to ensure your safe return." She said no. Preston's voice was steel. "Think that is clear enough." The attorney's eyes narrowed as he studied Preston. "And you are her employer and her friend. You can head back to Boston and tell Mr. Rose his daughter is doing just fine without him. This is a family matter." "She is 22 years old," Preston said flatly. "Old enough to make her own choices. You got no legal right to force her to go anywhere." Mr. Whitmore reached into his jacket, and Preston's hand moved to his gun, but the attorney only pulled out an envelope. "Mr. Rose anticipated resistance. He asked me to give you this, Miss Rose. Perhaps after you read it, you will reconsider." Rebecca took the envelope with shaking hands. She recognized her father's handwriting on the front. Part of her wanted to throw it in the fire unread, but Preston's steady presence at her back gave her courage. She broke the seal and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The letter was short and brutal. Her father informed her that her intended husband, Mr. Bernard Ashford, had been quite offended by her disappearance. To salvage the business arrangement, her father had been forced to offer additional concessions. Her selfishness had cost the family dearly. If she returned immediately and married Mr. Ashford, all would be forgiven. If she refused, she would be cut off entirely. He would not send money or support. She would be dead to him. Rebecca read it twice, then carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. When she looked up, her eyes were dry. "You may tell my father that I release him from any obligation to me. I will not marry Mr. Ashford. I will not return to Boston. I choose to remain here." Mr. Whitmore's expression finally cracked, showing frustration. "Miss Rose, be reasonable. What future do you have here? Working in a saloon. Your father offers you a respectable marriage, security, a position in society." "He offers me a prison," Rebecca said quietly. "I would rather face an uncertain future with my dignity intact than live in comfortable slavery." The attorney shook his head. "You are making a terrible mistake. When you come to your senses and find yourself destitute, do not expect your father to welcome you back. She will not be destitute." Preston's voice was calm and certain. "She has a job here as long as she wants it, and friends who will look after her. Your services are not needed, Mr. Whitmore." After the attorney left, Rebecca sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. The reality of what she had just done crashed over her. She had truly burned her bridges now. There was no going back. Preston poured 2 whiskeys and handed her one. "Drink." She obeyed, coughing as the liquor burned down her throat. "That was my father's attorney. My father wants me to return to Boston and marry a man I despise. Figured it was something like that." Preston sat across from her, his long legs stretched out. "You meant what you said about staying." "I have nowhere else to go now." "That is not what I asked." Rebecca met his eyes, those pale blue eyes that had haunted her dreams for weeks now. "Yes, I meant it. I want to stay here." Something shifted in his expression, a tension she had not realized he was carrying melting away. "Good. Would have hated to lose my best bartender." It was meant to be light, but the weight of his gaze told her it meant more than that. She wanted to say something, to acknowledge what was building between them, but fear held her tongue. What if she was wrong? What if she was reading more into his kindness than existed? She had been so sheltered, so naive about the world. How could she trust her own feelings? The weeks that followed were some of the happiest Rebecca had ever known. With the threat of her father's interference gone, she felt truly free for the first time in her life. She threw herself into her work, into building a life in Santa Fe. Preston remained steady at her side, a quiet presence she had come to depend on more than was wise. They fell into patterns of domesticity that felt dangerously like a real relationship. Preston taught her to ride so she could accompany him to the market when he bought supplies. They took Sunday walks when the saloon was closed, exploring the hills around town. He told her stories of his years on the trail, the hard work and danger, and the strange beauty of sleeping under a sky full of stars. She told him about Boston, about her mother's gentle kindness and her father's cold ambition, about the books she had read and the life she had dreamed of, before she understood how little choice she would have. In November, the first real cold snap hit Santa Fe. Rebecca woke in her small room to find frost on the window and her breath misting in the air. She dressed quickly, layering every piece of clothing she owned, and hurried downstairs to find Preston already building up the fire in the saloon stove. Should have checked on you earlier, he said without turning around. That room gets cold at night. I managed fine. He stood, brushing ash from his hands, and studied her critically. You are shivering. Come here. She moved closer to the stove, holding her hands out to the growing warmth. Preston disappeared into the back room and returned with a thick wool blanket. Before she could protest, he draped it around her shoulders, his hands lingering for just a moment. Can't have you getting sick, he said gruffly. Who would run my bar? But his hands on her shoulders, the concern in his eyes, spoke of something deeper than worry about his business. Rebecca looked up at him, suddenly brave in the dim morning light. Preston, the door banged open and one of the local ranchers burst in. Pike, we got trouble. Someone rustled 50 head of cattle from the Double R last night. Sheriff is putting together a posse. Preston's jaw tightened. Damn, all right, tell him I will be there in 10 minutes. After the rancher left, Preston turned back to Rebecca. Lock the doors after I leave. Do not open for anyone unless you know them. I will be back as soon as I can. Will it be dangerous? She hated how small her voice sounded. It is always dangerous going after thieves, but I know how to handle myself. He picked up his gun belt from behind the bar, strapping it on with practiced efficiency. Then he pulled a rifle down from the wall rack. Rebecca caught his arm, her heart pounding. Please be careful. He looked down at where her hand gripped his sleeve, then up at her face. For a long moment they stood frozen, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. His free hand came up, his fingers brushing her cheek with unexpected tenderness. I will come back, he said quietly. I promise. Then he was gone, leaving her standing alone in the empty saloon, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders and his touch still burning on her skin. The day dragged endlessly. Rebecca cleaned everything she could think of, then cleaned it again. She tried to read but could not focus on the words. Her mind kept conjuring terrible images of Preston shot, bleeding, dying somewhere on the empty plains. The thought made her physically ill. It was dark when she finally heard boots on the porch. She flew to the door, pulling it open to find Preston standing there, dusty and exhausted but unharmed. Relief flooded through her so powerfully that she swayed. Easy. He caught her, his hands strong on her arms. I am all right. Did you catch them? 3 of them. Sheriff has them locked up. Lost the trail on the rest. He looked at her strangely, as if seeing something new in her face. You were worried about me. Of course I was worried, she said, voice sharper than she intended. You could have been killed. Preston's expression softened. He closed the door behind him, shutting out the cold night. They stood in the dimness close together, the air between them charged with unspoken things. Rebecca, he said, his voice rough. I need to tell you something. Her heart hammered against her ribs. What is it? These past months, working with you, getting to know you, it has been. He paused, seeming to struggle for words. You make me think about things I gave up on years ago. A real home, someone to come back to, a future that is more than just the next day's work. Preston. She reached out, her hand finding his. His fingers closed around hers, strong and warm. I know I got no right asking, he continued. I am just a saloon owner with a rough past and no prospects beyond this place. You deserve better. Someone educated like you, someone who can give you the life you were born to, but I cannot keep pretending I do not feel what I feel. Joy and terror warred in her chest. What do you feel? I am in love with you. The words were simple, direct, utterly sincere. Have been for weeks now, maybe longer. You are the bravest person I know, Rebecca rose. You left everything familiar to choose your own path. You work hard, you treat people with kindness, and you make me laugh even when I am exhausted. You make me want to be better than I am. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I love you too. I have been so frightened to admit it, even to myself. But it is true. When you left this morning, all I could think was that I never told you, and if something happened to you, you would never know." Preston pulled her close, and she went willingly, burying her face against his chest. His arms came around her, solid and safe, and she felt something inside her relax, some tension she had been carrying for years finally releasing. "I am scared," she whispered against his shirt. "I am scared you will change your mind about me. Once you truly know me, all my flaws and fears and foolishness, you will realize I am not who you think I am." He pulled back just enough to tip her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. In the lamplight, they were impossibly blue, filled with a tenderness that made her breath catch. "I have never been more sure of anything," he said firmly. "I know exactly who you are, Rebecca. I have watched you build a new life from nothing. I have seen you handle drunks with grace and learn to ride even though you were terrified of horses. I have heard you laugh at the piano player's terrible jokes and seen you slip food to that stray dog that hangs around the back door. I know you talk in your sleep sometimes, and you hate coffee but drink it anyway because you think you should, and you get a little wrinkle between your eyebrows when you are concentrating. I know you, and I love every part of who you are. What if I disappoint you? Not possible." "Preston, I am serious." What if he kissed her, cutting off her protests? His lips were warm and firm against hers, tasting of dust and determination. Rebecca gasped, her hands clutching at his shoulders as heat flooded through her. She had been kissed before, chased pecks from boys at parties in Boston, but nothing like this. Nothing that made her feel like she was burning from the inside out, like she might fly apart if he let her go. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. "Do you believe me now?" he asked, his voice husky. "I want to," she whispered. "I want to believe this is real. It is as real as anything I have ever felt." He rested his forehead against hers. "I know we have not known each other long. I know you deserve a proper courtship. But Rebecca, I am asking you to take a chance on me. On us. I want you by my side as my partner in this saloon and in my life. I want to wake up every morning knowing you are near. I want to build something real with you. Are you asking me to marry you? I am if you are willing to have me." Rebecca's heart felt too large for her chest. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, Preston Pike, I will marry you." His smile transformed his entire face, years dropping away to reveal the boy he must have been before life hardened him. He picked her up and spun her around, her laughter ringing through the empty saloon. When he set her down, he kissed her again, slower this time, pouring all his love and promise into the press of his lips against hers. They were married a week later in the small church on the plaza. Rebecca wore a simple dress of pale blue that the seamstress had helped her make, and Preston borrowed a proper suit from the banker. The ceremony was attended by the friends she had made in Santa Fe, respectable townspeople who had come to value her for who she was rather than where she came from. The piano player from the saloon provided music, and the hotel owner who had first directed her to Preston stood as witness. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Preston kissed her with such tenderness that Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. This was real. This was hers. She had chosen her own path and found something more precious than she had ever imagined. They moved her few belongings into Preston's room behind the saloon, a space only marginally larger than the one she had been using, but made perfect by his presence. That first night as husband and wife, lying in his arms in the darkness, Rebecca finally allowed herself to believe in her own happiness. "What are you thinking?" Preston asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "That I never imagined I could feel this way, this safe, this loved." "You are loved," he said firmly. "Every day for the rest of my life I will make sure you know that." Winter settled over Santa Fe, bringing cold nights and occasional snow. Rebecca and Preston ran the saloon together, a partnership that felt natural and right. They worked in harmony, anticipating each other's needs, moving around each other in the small space with the ease of long practice. The customers began referring to them as a unit, Pike and his missus, and Rebecca treasured the title. On Christmas Eve, Preston closed the saloon early. They walked together to the plaza, where the townspeople had gathered for a celebration. Luminarias lined the streets, hundreds of small candles in paper bags casting a soft, golden glow. Musicians played while children ran laughing through the crowd. Preston held her close against his side, sheltering her from the cold. "Happy?" he asked. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. In January, Rebecca realized she was pregnant. She told Preston on a Sunday morning, nervous despite herself. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around just like he had when she agreed to marry him, then spent the rest of the day treating her like she was made of glass, despite her laughing protests that she was perfectly fine. As her belly grew, so did their excitement. They prepared the small room that had been Rebecca's when she first arrived, transforming it into a nursery. Preston built a cradle with his own hands, working late into the night to get every detail perfect. Rebecca sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at how small they were. The baby arrived on a warm day in September, a year and 2 months after Rebecca had first stepped off the stagecoach. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Preston paced the saloon below, terrified, listening to her cries. But the midwife was skilled, and finally, in the golden light of late afternoon, their son entered the world with a lusty wail. Preston held the baby with shaking hands, staring down at the red-faced infant with an expression of absolute wonder. "We made this," he said, his voice cracking. "He is perfect." They named him Thomas after Preston's father, and he became the center of their world. Preston proved to be a devoted father, rising in the night to help with feedings, pacing the floor when the baby was fussy, singing off key lullabies that made Rebecca smile. Watching him with their son, she fell in love with him all over again. Thomas was followed by a daughter 2 years later, whom they named Grace. She had Preston's blue eyes and Rebecca's dark hair, and she wrapped her father around her tiny finger from the moment of her birth. The small apartment behind the saloon grew cramped, but Preston was already making plans. He had saved carefully, and with Rebecca managing the saloon's books with her educated eye, they were more profitable than ever. When Grace was 6 months old, Preston took Rebecca to see a plot of land on the edge of town. "I know it is not much," he said, "but I think we could build something here, a real house for our family." Rebecca looked at the empty land, imagining it with her mind's eye. A proper home with bedrooms for the children, a kitchen big enough to cook real meals, maybe even a porch where they could sit in the evenings. "It is perfect," she said. They built the house themselves, with help from friends in town. It took 6 months of hard work, but finally, in the spring of 1883, they moved into their new home. It was simple but sturdy, with whitewashed walls and shutters Rebecca painted blue. She planted flowers in the yard and vegetables in a small garden. Preston built a swing for Thomas, who was now 3 and endlessly energetic. They kept the saloon, hiring a manager to run it during the day while Rebecca stayed home with the children. Preston still spent his evenings there, but now he came home to a real family, to children who ran to greet him and a wife who kissed him hello with a love that had only deepened with time. One evening in early summer, Rebecca sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Preston joined her, settling into the chair beside hers with a contented sigh. Inside, the children were asleep, worn out from a day of play. You ever regret it?" Preston asked quietly. "Giving up your old life?" Rebecca reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Not for a single moment. That was not my life, not truly. This is my life. You, our children, this home we have built. I am exactly where I am supposed to be." "I still cannot believe sometimes that you chose me," he admitted. "A rough cowboy with calloused hands and no education." "You are the best man I have ever known," Rebecca said firmly. "You are kind and strong and honest. You have given me more than I ever dreamed of having. You have given me freedom, love, and a real partnership. Do you know how rare that is?" Preston brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I love you, Rebecca Pike, more now than the day I married you. And I love you, always." They sat together as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. From inside the house came the faint sound of Grace stirring in her sleep, and the creak of Thomas rolling over in his bed. The sounds of their family, their life. Rebecca thought back to that day 5 years ago when she had stepped off the stagecoach, terrified and uncertain. She had been running from something then, fleeing a future she could not bear. But she had run toward something too, though she had not known it at the time. She had run toward this, toward a love that anchored her without caging her, toward a man who saw her strength and cherished it, toward a life built on her own choices and hard work. The path had not been easy. There had been struggles and doubts, nights when money was tight and worry kept them awake. But they had faced everything together, and that made all the difference. Years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Thomas grew into a serious boy who loved books almost as much as his mother, often found reading in quiet corners. Grace became a whirlwind of energy, always ready for adventure, with her father's fearlessness and her mother's determination. A third child joined them when Thomas was 7, another boy they named Samuel, who had a gift for making people laugh. The saloon continued to thrive under their management. Preston eventually sold it to the manager who had been running it, deciding he wanted to focus on other ventures. He bought a small ranch outside of town, running cattle and breaking horses. Rebecca helped him manage the business side, her education proving invaluable as she handled contracts and accounts. Their house grew with their family, Preston adding rooms as they needed them. The garden flourished under Rebecca's care, providing vegetables for their table and flowers for their home. She took in sewing work when she had time, teaching Grace and other young girls in town how to make their own clothes. On their 10th anniversary, Preston took Rebecca on a trip, leaving the children with friends for a week. They rode out to the ranch and spent their days exploring the land on horseback and their nights under the stars, recapturing the feeling of those early days when it was just the two of them. "Do you remember when you told me you were scared I would change my mind about you?" Preston asked one night as they lay wrapped in blankets beside their campfire. "I remember," Rebecca said softly. "I was so afraid of losing you, so convinced I was not enough. You have always been enough. More than enough." He pulled her closer. 10 years, 3 children, and all the trials life has thrown at us, and I love you more every single day. You believe me now?" "I do," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The fear that had haunted her in those early days had been replaced by certainty. She knew Preston's love, had seen it proven in 1,000 small actions over the years. In the way he looked at her across the dinner table. In the way he held her when she cried after a miscarriage between Samuel and Grace's births. In the way he supported her dreams and celebrated her successes. In the way he showed their children what real love looked like. More years passed. Thomas left home at 18 to attend university in California, a dream Rebecca encouraged even though she missed him terribly. He returned 4 years later with a degree and a passion for teaching, taking a position at the school in Santa Fe. Grace, true to her adventurous spirit, married a surveyor at 20 and traveled with him as he mapped the changing territories. She sent long letters full of her adventures that Rebecca treasured. Samuel took over the ranch, proving to have his father's gift with horses and his mother's head for business. Preston's hair turned gray at the temples, and lines deepened around his eyes. But to Rebecca, he remained as handsome as the day she first saw him in that hotel doorway. Her own dark hair began to silver, and her hands showed the marks of years of work, but Preston still looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. They became pillars of the Santa Fe community. Preston served on the town council, working to improve conditions for working people. Rebecca helped establish a library and started a women's reading group. Together, they created a loan fund to help young people start businesses, remembering how much Preston's initial offer of employment had meant to Rebecca all those years ago. On evenings when the work was done and the house was quiet, they still sat together on the porch, hands linked, watching the sun set over the mountains. Sometimes they talked about their day, their children, plans for the future. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, finding peace in simply being together. "I got a letter from Grace today," Rebecca said one evening, her voice bright with excitement. "She is expecting her first child in November. We are going to be grandparents." Preston's face lit up with a grin. "Grandparents. Well, I'll be. Grace is going to be a mother. Think she is ready for that." "Was I ready when Thomas came along?" Rebecca laughed. "We figure it out. That is what you told me then, and you were right." The baby, a girl they named Rose after Rebecca, arrived healthy and strong. Grace brought her to visit when she was 3 months old, and Rebecca wept with joy as she held her granddaughter for the first time. Preston sat beside her, one arm around her shoulders, looking at the baby with the same wonder he had shown when holding his own children. More grandchildren followed over the years. Thomas married a teacher and they had twin boys. Samuel and his wife had 4 children in quick succession, filling the ranch house with noise and laughter. Grace had 2 more daughters. The Pike family grew and flourished, branches spreading but roots remaining deep in the New Mexico soil. On their 25th anniversary, their children arranged a celebration. Friends and family filled the house and spilled out into the yard. There was music and dancing and enough food to feed half the town. As the evening wore on, Preston pulled Rebecca away from the crowd, leading her to a quiet spot at the edge of the property. 25 years, he said, shaking his head in wonder. "Feels like yesterday you walked into my saloon, scared but trying so hard to be brave." "I was terrified," Rebecca admitted. "Of everything. Of the town, of the work, of my father finding me. But most of all, I was terrified of how I felt about you, even in those early days. It seemed impossible that anything good could come from running away like I did. Best thing that ever happened to me was you walking through that door." Preston cupped her face in his weathered hands. "You gave me a life I never thought I could have. A real home, children, a love that has sustained me through everything. You made me believe in happiness again. You gave me freedom," Rebecca said, her voice thick with emotion. "Not just from my father, but from all the things I thought I had to be. You let me discover who I really was. You loved me for that person, not for some version you wanted me to become. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." They kissed as the last light faded from the sky, their shadows blending together in the gathering darkness. Behind them, their family laughed and celebrated, the sound of joy echoing across the land. The years turned gently after that, bringing the quiet contentment of a life well lived. Preston eventually handed the ranch over to Samuel, though he still rode out most days to check on things and offer advice when asked. Rebecca continued her charity work and her sewing, her hands still nimble despite the arthritis that crept into her joints. They spent increasing amounts of time with their grandchildren, telling stories of the old days and teaching them the values that had guided their own lives. When Preston's health began to fail in his 70th year, Rebecca nursed him with fierce devotion. She sat by his bedside, holding his hand, reminding him of all they had shared. Their children gathered and Preston spoke to each of them, sharing wisdom and love. But it was to Rebecca he always returned, his eyes finding her face. "Do not regret anything," he told her on a clear autumn morning, his voice weak but steady. "We had a good life, a great life. You made me the happiest man alive." "You cannot leave me," Rebecca said, tears streaming down her face despite her efforts to be strong. "I need you." "You are the strongest person I know," Preston said with a faint smile. "You will be fine, but I will be waiting for you wherever I end up. We are not done, Rebecca Pike. This is just until we meet again." He passed peacefully that afternoon, surrounded by his family, his hand clasped in Rebecca's. She felt his spirit leave, felt the absence of him like a physical wound, but she also felt the weight of his love, a quarter-century of devotion that death could not diminish. Rebecca lived another 12 years, cared for by her children and grandchildren. She remained sharp and engaged, still reading voraciously, still offering advice, still telling stories of the remarkable man who had given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. She spoke often of Preston, keeping his memory alive for the youngest grandchildren who had never known him. When she finally followed him, at the age of 84, it was peaceful. She died in her sleep in the house Preston had built for her, surrounded by photographs of their life together. Her last conscious thought was of him, of those pale blue eyes that had seen through her fear to the strong woman beneath, of the voice that had said with such certainty, "I have never been more sure of anything." The town of Santa Fe turned out for her funeral, generations of people whose lives she had touched. Her children and grandchildren spoke of her courage, her kindness, her unwavering love for family and community. They buried her beside Preston on a hill overlooking the town, the mountains standing eternal watch over them both. Years later, her great-granddaughter, researching family history, discovered the letter Rebecca's father had sent through his attorney all those years ago. She read it with shock, unable to imagine the courage it must have taken for Rebecca to turn her back on everything she had known. But she also found the journals Rebecca had kept, page after page documenting a life filled with love, purpose, and joy. The last entry, written just a week before Rebecca died, summed it all up simply. "If I could go back and do it all again, I would not change a single thing. Every struggle, every doubt, every moment of fear was worth it for the life I found. Preston taught me what it means to be truly loved, and our children and grandchildren are the legacy of that love. I am ready now to rest, knowing I lived fully and loved completely. What more could anyone ask?" The great-granddaughter closed the journal with tears in her eyes, marveling at the love story written in those faded pages. A runaway bride and a cowboy saloon owner, finding each other in the Wild West and building a love that would echo through generations. It seemed like something from a novel, too perfect to be real. But the evidence was everywhere in their family tree, in the strength and kindness passed down through the years, in the stories told and retold until they became legend. In Santa Fe, where the old saloon building still stood though converted to other uses, people sometimes spoke of Preston Pike and his wife Rebecca, the Boston lady who had found love in the desert. They talked about how Preston had seen something special in the frightened girl who walked into his saloon, and how she had proven him right 1,000 times over. They told their children that true love was patient and kind, that it gave freedom rather than taking it, and that sometimes the greatest courage was in choosing your own path, even when the whole world told you not to. And on quiet evenings, when the sun painted the adobe buildings gold and the mountains stood silent against the sky, you could almost imagine them there still, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful that would never truly die. Their story lived on, a testament to the power of love to transform lives and create legacies, to the courage it takes to choose yourself, and to the joy that comes from finding someone who loves you exactly as you are. The Wild West had been a land of harsh realities and harder choices, but it had also been a place where two people could create their own destiny, where a frightened runaway could become a beloved matriarch, and where a lonely cowboy could find the home he had always been searching for. Their love had been tested by time and hardship, doubt and distance, but it had endured, growing stronger with each passing year until it became the foundation upon which an entire family was built. And that, in the end, was the real happy ending, not just finding love but nurturing it, protecting it, and allowing it to flourish into something that would outlast them both.